British royals are used to being greeted with cheering crowds wherever they go, but in Jamaica, Prince William and the Duchess of Cambridge were met with protesters demanding an apology for British slavery. Prince William expressed his profound sorrow.
The appalling atrocity of slavery forever stains our history.
As Jamaica seeks to remove the Queen as its head of state, what does this mean for the royals, the Commonwealth, and for Britain? Hello, welcome to the programme. I'm Shuli Ghosh. Prince William and Kate's tour was meant to secure the monarchy in the Caribbean after Barbados removed the Queen of England as its head of state. But the royals were met with opposition and protests as Jamaica's president declared his country wants to remove the Queen as its head of state.
But Jamaica is, as you would see, a country that is very proud of our history, very proud of what we have achieved. And we are moving on, and we intend to attain in short order our development goals and fulfill our true ambitions and destiny as an independent, developed, prosperous country.
Well, joining us today is Dickie Arbiter, royal commentator. In London via Skype, Angelina Osborne, historian of Black British history, and also with me in the studio, Rafe Heydel-Mankoo, royal historian. Good to have all of you with me. Thank you for joining us. Dickie, let me start with you. Is it a surprise that Kate and William met that response that they did in Jamaica?
I don't think it was a surprise. The Caribbean have been lobbying for quite a long time to have their own head of state, to become republics. It's nothing new. Jamaica's taken 60 years to decide that. It became independent in 62. And I suppose the people who organised it should have been aware that certain things were happening. Certain things that happened should never have happened. And it certainly wouldn't have happened in my day when I was organising tours.
Do you think Kate and William were caught on the hop?
I think they probably were caught on the hop because the media have got an agenda. And as soon as you sort of create a photo op, which the football match, and it wasn't a match, it was a kickabout, with kids behind a chainmail fence, that was something that should have been predicted. Shouldn't have happened like that. Kids should have been on the pitch, metre-high barrier, and then there would have been no problem at all. But because they were behind a fence, and you've got to lay the blame at the Prime Minister's office because they organised the tour, and they should have foreseen things like this. Unfortunately, they don't. They don't understand how the British media works. They're always looking for a story, and that was the story they were looking for.
Angelina, Prince William made a speech. He spoke of his profound sorrow over slavery. He said slavery was abhorrent. It should never have happened. It forever stains our history. Do you think his words were enough?
I'm not I don't think they were. When you say something like slavery never should have happened, it suggests that it was a mistake. And I think that it wasn't a mistake. I think it's fairly evident it wasn't a mistake. It was really a really important global economic enterprise on the part of the British and certainly other European nations to profit from transatlantic enslavement.
There's also a lot made of the fact that William used the word sorrow but not sorry. However, there is political connotations in apologising, isn't there? Because that admits responsibility, and that's not something the royal family could do, could they?
I think that they should take responsibility, or certainly discuss and admit their own role in the establishment of transatlantic enslavement. But as you say, there is very unlikely that you're going to get an apology, an actual apology, because it does admit responsibility and liability.
Yeah, I mean, this is clearly a very divisive subject. As far as Jamaica's concerned, it's looking to possibly remove the Queen as head of state. How do you feel Jamaica handled that whole visit by Kate and William?
Well, I have to say, I have to agree with Dickie Arbiter here. It was the responsibility of the Prime Minister to ensure that those unfortunate moments didn't happen. And it's also a lot to blame on both the Jamaican and the British media in the fact that they were clearly slanted in their attitudes, because Raheem Sterling walked along the exact same chain link fence, for example, as Kate and William. And there, of course, they had happy, glowing photographs on social media, and no one dared to suggest that this was in any way a sense of a repetition of colonialism. It seems as if there's been an unfair bias and a desire to seek out any possible opportunity to spin this in a negative way. People are forgetting the large numbers of crowds that turned out on every single stop that the royal couple made, the rapturous reception that they received, and I'm afraid that was overshadowed.
I think the other point to make too is that Andrew Holness, Prime Minister, was completely out of order in making the statement that he did make in what was ostensibly a welcoming ceremony for William and Catherine to Jamaica. But instead, he chose that opportunity, because the world's press were there, to say, and I'm paraphrasing now, we're basically going to ditch the Queen and we're going to go for a republic, we're going to have our own head of state. No problem with having your own head of state, but there is a time to say it and a time when not to say it, and welcoming the representatives of the Queen, and it is still a realm state and the Queen is still head of state, to welcome them with that sort of statement was wrong, was very insensitive.
But this issue, Rafe, and I want to ask you this because you're Indian, as it happens, I'm half Indian. This issue of Britain's history with Commonwealth countries, and Angelina makes the point that, you know, responsibility has to be taken at some point. Do you think the royal family should be addressing that?
I'm half Indian too, like yourself. I don't see why they should. I mean, one of the problems we have here is that there is a complete failure to teach the advantages of constitutional monarchy, the benefits of civic institutions in this country, in the Caribbean, all over the world. You see that there is no actual effort made to teach people why the monarchy is an advantage to those countries, or indeed to teach the fact that the monarchy was extremely progressive by the standards of the era. You know, in the 1750s, King George III wrote an essay condemning slavery. This was a full 50 years before the abolition of the slave trade. Queen Victoria, his granddaughter, was very well known for her warm reception towards the Muslim community, towards Maharaja Dalip Singh of the Sikh Empire. Her son, Edward VII, very famous for his positive attitudes towards the Jews, raising anti-Semitism with the Tsar of Russia. Empire and slavery are universal elements. Every country in the world has experienced slavery. The African empire, there were numerous cases in Africa of the slave trade
But that doesn't
existing.
mean that we
Why
shouldn't
does that mean
be
that
doing
Britain
something about it today.
I think enough has been done, but what I would like to see from people who are advancing this desire for an apology is, why aren't they also looking to Nigeria and asking Nigeria to apologise? How about Benin? Why doesn't Benin apologise? Because European slave traders weren't going into inland to get slaves. They were getting slaves that were sold to them by other Africans. You know, Donald Duke, who was the governor of Calabar, presidential candidate in the 2019 Nigerian election, said that my ancestors were involved in selling slaves, but I wasn't involved with that, so why should I apologise? I think we need to move on.
Angelina, what do you make of that? And do Commonwealth countries feel that the British monarchy and that Britain should be talking about reparations?
Certainly, I think that this work has been going on for as long as there's been, since the 18th century, okay, in different manifestations. I think the idea that the royal family and the British government, successive governments, do not take responsibility for transatlantic enslavement is a little bit disingenuous. I don't fully share the views of the last gentleman who just spoke. You know, that slavery was supported by government and political structures. Slavery couldn't have happened without royal charters. Slavery, in terms of the Royal African Company, for example, was established by Charles II and his brother, the Duke of York. So we know that they definitely profited from the trade and trafficking in African people. We know that Jamaica, for example, was literally the jewel in Britain's crown during this period. You know, it was the richest enslavement colony that Britain had. And so we need to bear that in mind, okay?
Is this the direct reason why countries like Jamaica and Barbados are now seeking to not have the Queen as their head of state?
It may be. It also may be everything that's also happened in recent years. It may have something to do with what was happening, has been happening, and continues to happen around the Windrush scandal. Okay, so the Windrush scandal is something that we've been aware of only in the last 4 years. But certainly these countries would have been conscious of the amount of people who have been deported incorrectly back to Barbados, Jamaica, and other Caribbean countries for some time now. And perhaps it might be the idea of there being lack of acknowledgement or acceptance of what's been happening might be another reason why people are angry and upset and want things to change. You know, when people came over here in the 1940s, there was this kind of compact where people were invited because they were British subjects. And there's been a sort of really kind of a lack of really sort of respect around those ideas and the continuous furore around immigration policy. I imagine many of these Caribbean countries are quite frustrated about. Also, I think we have to factor into what happened in 2020 with George Floyd and this idea about reckoning around racial injustice.
I mean, the conversation about racial attitudes is huge. But on the subject of Windrush was a huge issue for British politics. And how has that impacted?
Well, it was a huge issue on British politics. But let's take this further. I'm curious to know why the Caribbean are coming late to the Republican Party when the African states started going Republican, ditching the Queen way back in the 1950s.
Why do you think they're doing it now?
I don't know why they're doing it now. I mean, Jamaica's had 60 years to decide whether it wants to become a republic or not. It's now decided.
Well, is it a generational thing? Perhaps younger people aren't quite so enamoured of the royal family as the older generation.
Maybe it is a generational thing. The thing is that, as far as the Queen is concerned, she's pragmatic. She said so much in so many words in Australia in 2000 after the Australian referendum, when it went to the monarchy instead of going a republic, that it is for the people to decide. The people in Barbados, they have decided and they've become a republic. The people in Jamaica will no doubt decide, or the government will decide for them, and they will become a republic. And so the rest of the Caribbean countries will probably follow suit. This is not a problem. You've got to separate this from the wider Commonwealth. The Commonwealth will exist. It is a voluntary organisation of 54 member states. There are states who never had British association. Mozambique, Cameroon, Rwanda, Angola has put its hat in the ring, wants to become a member. So let's separate the two. The Commonwealth will continue to exist. Whoever is the head of the Commonwealth, it's not a hereditary title. The Queen has asked the Commonwealth Secretariat and its members, she would wish for Prince Charles to be its next head. That is going to happen. What happens after that? Well, William made the point. It's not his bailiwick.
I think it's an important question as to why this is happening now. And I think there are three reasons. One, of course, is we're coming to a point where the succession is being discussed a lot. And the time of the succession was always going to be a time for debate amongst all the Commonwealth realms about the future of the monarchy. But it's telling also that it is a generational issue too. But it's telling that those people who actually lived during the time of the Queen's reign in the 1950s and so forth, they never pushed for a republic. It's telling that India and Pakistan and other countries got rid of the monarchy, but the Caribbean didn't. It's been doing now, and it's a confluence of two different things. Firstly, it's the rise of critical race theory. It's the attempt to export George Floyd to Britain and to the Caribbean, where there's no real relevance or connection to an American situation. But it's also the influence of China. And China is invested so heavily in the Caribbean, in Jamaica most of all, and is using debt diplomacy. It sees the Caribbean as a strategic post, very important because of its proximity to America. And as Tom Tugendhat, the British head of the Select Committee, said, it seems as if the Caribbean willingly wants to get rid of a harmless British Queen and replace it with an aggressive imperial China. And we even had in the Sunday Times an article saying it's no more Little England in the Caribbean, it's Little China. And this is an issue which I think the Caribbean sees China as a source of much more money than Britain ever gave to it in recent years. But the problem is, colonialism comes under many guises, and what China is doing is a new form of colonialism. And Britain is one of the world's least racist countries. If you want to find one of the world's most racist countries, you merely need to look to China and its attitude towards minorities, including black people.
Well, as we've already said, the Jamaican Prime Minister Andrew Holness has campaigned on a platform of making Jamaica a republic. But here's what people in Jamaica had to say about the British monarchy.
It is an insult to us for these young people to be here to try to persuade us to keep the status quo in place when our goal is to loosen and remove the hands, the gloved hands of the Queen from around our necks so that we can breathe.
Yearning for liberation, temptation, frustration, desolation. What a situation! Segregation, degradation, persecution. What a tribulation.
Because we began our independence economically weak after having been pillaged by the monarchy, who today live on the benefits of that wealth.
Angelina, do you agree that the example set by Barbados, and now it looks like Jamaica is also making moves to remove the Queen as the head of state, do you see that as a trend that is going to continue?
I do see it as a trend. I think the idea, we have to, personally, I think we need to think a bit more carefully. I mean, the idea of this critical race theory that's being kind of thrown about as something that's really quite dangerous and terrible. And my personal view is that critical race theory is a methodology, it's a pedagogy, it's not an ideology. It's trying to understand how things work. I mean, the gentleman again alluded that Britain is the least racist country. I would challenge that view. Okay, I would challenge that view based on so many things, reports, so many observations that demonstrate that there is an issue that we need to explore around racism in Britain. But to go back to your point about whether other countries will follow Barbados and possibly Jamaica, I think they will, because I think that the idea of wanting to seek independence, not just independence from as Britain as former colonies, but removing the Queen as head of state, is really about asserting identities that are not just about British or French or whatever a region we're talking about. It's about maybe also asserting one sort of African identities, the ones that we are not being taught in schools. People who are living in the Caribbean are the descendants of enslaved African people, and perhaps want to really explore and adhere to more of these identities and understandings about their histories prior to being captured and enslaved. These ideas of cultural, political, social, these are very important to people. So it's very difficult to kind of attribute it to just one particular thing. There's lots of things, very complex issues here that we need to consider when we're thinking about why does Jamaica, why does Barbados, and possibly other British Caribbean countries are going to make the decision to sever their ties from the British monarchy and the British state.
Dickie, this idea of identity of countries like Jamaica and Barbados, do you think when William and Kate visited the Caribbean, did they do anything to bolster the popularity of the monarchy, to make countries feel that their identity was not totally wrapped up in British colonialism?
It wasn't their platform to go and sell the monarchy to the Jamaicans, to sell the monarchy to Belize or any of the other Caribbean countries. They were there at the behest of the Queen because Jamaica and the other countries are realm states. It is the Queen's Platinum Jubilee, and they were there representing her. They weren't there to sell the monarchy. It is for the people to decide as to whether they want to retain the monarchy. They will decide in Jamaica, probably not.
But I mean, their role in countries like Jamaica is symbolic, isn't it? But if that's a symbolism that people no longer want, I mean, we heard in the Vox Pops earlier people saying that they felt that the monarchy didn't matter to them, that they were still being exploited.
Yeah, let's put this into context. They didn't go there because they put their hand up in Kensington Palace, say, we would like to go to the Caribbean. They went there because they were invited by the respective governments. If the respective governments didn't want them, then they shouldn't have issued an invitation.
And Rafe, this idea, I mean, Dickie says quite rightly that there is a difference between the Commonwealth countries, and there seems to be no suggestion that countries want to stop being part of the Commonwealth, but they do want a different relationship with Britain and with the British monarchy. Would you agree with that?
Yes, and the monarchy has never ever stood in the way of any country that sought to go down that path or to have those discussions. And I think that's very important. You know, when it was very telling again that after independence came to all of these countries, they freely chose to stay associated through the Commonwealth. Compare that, for example, to Russia. When the Soviet Union collapsed, Poland, Hungary and the Czech Republic couldn't get out of there fast enough and join NATO and the EU. So, of course, as things evolve, there will be new relationships. But the idea that, you know, the monarchy has something to account for, that the monarchy is responsible for something or has a responsibility, I think is for the birds.
But as Angelina says, the monarchy were in charge of Britain at a time when slavery was
Hang on. The monarchy have never been in charge. They haven't been in charge since the reign of Charles I. He got his head chopped off because he interfered with politics and Parliament. Parliament didn't like that. They chopped his head off, and they had no monarchy until 1760.
I think it's very important. That's a very important point. You know, and
1670.
The problem is there's a lot of ignorance that's around here. The British Empire comes in two halves, all right? The first 150 years, slavery was a very real and live and terrible issue. But the British Empire spent the last 150 years of its existence atoning for the empire. It was Christian humanitarianism, this evangelical Christianity that shaped and guided so much of what happened in the empire. The Royal Navy expended huge amounts of its resources in forcing an end to the slave trade. Slavery and imperialism are not unique to Britain, they are universal. What is unique to Britain is that Britain was the first country to actually enforce the abolition of the slave trade and enforce it globally.
I think
and that,
Angelina
I think, needs to be celebrated.
Abolition of slavery because of the consistent rebellions and revolts that were happening. They knew that if they didn't, that there'd never be peace in the Caribbean. Let's
the British had to go into Africa and enforce the abolition of the slave trade. Do you know how many people in Nigeria were actively protesting and opposed to the abolition of the slave trade because it hurt their industry? The slave trade in Africa existed long before Europeans arrived. The slave trade in Africa continued long after, into the 20th century.
I just want to bring up something that, you know, we obviously had Prince William speaking about his sorrow about the practice of slavery. But a few years ago, it was interesting, Prince Harry essentially suggested that Britain's colonial past had to be acknowledged for countries to move on. He was speaking in a video for the Queen's Commonwealth Trust in 2020. At the time, Dickie, Harry was criticised for conflating the Commonwealth with the Empire, but what he was doing was acknowledging the very real pain that people still feel about Britain's past, which is Angelina's point. In a sense, yes, actions can be taken and responsibility acknowledged, but there is still this very real, deep sense of injustice, which is clearly what the royal family came across.
There is a deep sense of injustice, but I don't see any daggers being pointed at Germany, France, Italy, all these countries that had possessions, if I can put it that way, and Belgium on the African continent. They too will swear. And I'm curious to know why there is this, there's nothing wrong with the debate, but why there is this massive debate on just one part of the world, the Caribbean, when quite clearly it was happening all over the African continent.
I think the debate is on the Caribbean because we had Barbados and now Jamaica talking about parting ways with the British monarchy. Possibly the Bahamas might follow. So, last quick question to you, Angelina: do you think we could see more countries ditching the Queen as their head of state and trying to put distance between themselves and Britain?
Okay, are you talking about the Caribbean, or are you talking about the Commonwealth?
Well, there are something like, I think it's 14 Commonwealth countries who currently have the Queen as their head of state, I mean, including Australia and Canada, where there is a big debate raging about whether that should be the case. Do you think there will be more of a move to remove the Queen as head of state in those countries?
I think if there has been actions and activities within those Commonwealth countries to discuss these issues in a way that people kind of think that we've been caught on the back foot here in regards to Jamaica. And I disagree that we've been caught on the back foot. This is a discussion that's been going on for a very, very long time. If these discussions have been happening in other Commonwealth countries, then yes, we can anticipate other Commonwealth countries wishing to sever their ties. But again, that depends on the strength of the movement in those countries.
Angelina, thank you very much. And Dickie and Rafe, thank you for joining us here on Roundtable. And remember, you can see more discussion and debate on our YouTube channel. Search for Roundtable TRT World. For now, from me and all the team here, bye-bye, and thanks for watching.